Hello, and welcome to my interpersonal communication project. This is the final project for the course HSCO508. I am currently a student attending Liberty University. Next slide. The objectives that we will cover during the presentation, I will answer the question, what is interpersonal communication? I will identify my personal overarching goal. I will explain how I use the techniques from throughout the course to enlarge conversation. I'll give a little bit of background about myself and why I might communicate the way that I do. I will explain behavioral blend, both my personal behavioral blend and just simple facts about behavioral blend in general. And I will explain how they have both positively and negatively affected my life. I will also explain potential barriers that I've come across during communication that I will, how I plan to overcome them. Lastly, I will discuss my action plan. Next slide. What is interpersonal communication? My personal definition of interpersonal communication is the way that individuals build relationships through communication by expressing feelings, thoughts, and emotions. These things can take place in families, between friends, in professional settings, in schools, during arguments. Stewart explains that even though we may think interpersonal communication as just contacting each other as humans, there's much more to it than that. Next slide. Stewart also defines interpersonal communication as the kind of communication that happens when the people that are involved talk and listen in ways that maximize their presence of personal. So for instance, when you're speaking with someone, you want to make sure you have an open mind, you're free of distraction, that you're respectful, and that you're honest. And the same thing with listening. You also want to be respectful and honest and also have your ears open at all times. Next slide. My personal overarching goal is to communicate better with individuals by expressing empathy and selflessness. I plan to become more assertive during communications, which can kind of be questionable due to my behavioral blend, as you'll see later in this presentation. But I am a very shy person at first. Once I get to know you, though, I do become overly assertive. So I want to start off by saying that I would like to become more assertive during the beginning of meeting somebody or during the start of a relationship. I will also, by using assertiveness in communication, it will allow me to self-disclose the proper amount of information and to indulge in healthier conversation. Next slide. Okay, so I plan to enlarge conversation by listening more effectively and using techniques that I've learned throughout the course to add appropriate information to the conversation where and when it is needed. I will practice self-disclosure skills by adding information where it is relevant and enhance future conversations. Also, both entities involved should be open, honest, and coherent to one another to be seen and both heard. Next slide. A little bit of background about myself. My name is Nicole Anderson. I am 27 years old. I am a single mother to a 5-year-old little girl that I love with my whole entire world. I grew up with both parents. They were never divorced. They never really argued around us. They typically stayed outdoors when they argued or something like that, away from us. So we didn't have a lot of chaos when we were growing up. Me and my brother, that is. I'm a very family-oriented person, so we do cookouts, we go places and do things together. Sometimes we do family reunions, and this is with extended family mostly, also family of 4 that we have here at home. I was born and raised near Richmond, Virginia, in a little town called Henrico County. I attended the University of Phoenix, the Richmond, Virginia campus, actually at the campus, and I graduated that program in October of 2015 with my bachelor's in psychology, and I'm currently working towards my master's in human service counseling with a concentration in health and wellness. Next slide. So to start off discussing behavioral blend, according to Carbonell, each behavioral blend complements how others see you. So your feelings, your thoughts, visions, passions, leadership styles, your following styles, and also how we perceive ourselves. Sometimes behavioral blends can differ when in home, in the comfort zone, as opposed to in the professional field. And this is normal. Sometimes people have different behavioral blends for when they're in their home and others when they're in their work environment. If you're looking at the DISC model on my presentation, you will see that D, I, S, and C all represent different behavioral blends. So D is an active task-oriented person, I, active people-oriented person, S, passive people-oriented person, and C, passive task-oriented person. So D, or the people with D characteristics typically are dominant. I, they're influential. S, they're steady or they are modest, they are very sincere. And C, they are compliant, they're cautious and sometimes shy. Next slide. So to discuss more about my personal behavioral blend, I am a DI personality blend. The positive things about this blend are I am determined and inspirational. I don't mean to sound arrogant when I say that, but I am a very determined person. And this happened recently when my daughter was born about 5 years ago. I realized that I had a purpose in life and that things needed to change a little bit. So I did, and I became very determined to make that change. So this is possibly where this behavioral blend started. Others want me to be active and extroverted, in control and decisive. I communicate well with other groups. I'm driven to help others to accomplish goals and tasks, mainly because I have seen it happen. I've done it myself, and I know that it can happen. I create positive atmospheres. I like to be positive. I do not like negativity in my life, unfortunately. So what needs to be improved? What can I improve during my behavior, or when speaking about my behavioral plan? What things could I improve on? So monitoring confidence and influence. Sometimes my confidence is a little out there and people can look at me as an arrogant person. So in order to do that, I should monitor confidence and influence. I should learn to respond more respectfully and wisely. Sometimes I have a tendency to kind of tell people how I feel, and not necessarily in a bad way, but sometimes it comes off strong, and as the book says, it's not really good to self-disclose much information up front or be very blunt. So therefore, I must guard my words, and sometimes this behavioral blend can create anger towards others but not necessarily meant. So I must be careful of what is said because we cannot take words back once they are spoken. Next slide. So into the barriers. My first and foremost, my personal barrier that I struggle with the most is self-disclosure. Sometimes I give too much too quickly, so I disclose too much information too quickly. My pride sometimes gets the best of me, and I'm unable to hold relationships because I'm very outspoken and I like to be heard, hence my behavioral blend. How I plan to deal with this. I plan to focus on my disclosures on what is going on during the conversation. I will not focus on the past. I will focus on the present, as that is what self-disclosure is all about. I will be more sensitive to how my disclosures may or may not affect other people. And when an individual becomes competitive or untrustworthy, I plan to keep my self-disclosure at a minimum. So until I'm actually involved in a relationship and can trust a person, I'm going to be very skeptical about what I say up front to them. Next slide. The second barrier that I will discuss is defensive communication. My personal form of defensive communication, sometimes my inner feelings and outward acts are based on feelings of threat. So if I feel threatened, sometimes I can act defensively, and this can create a feeling of accomplishment for me, sometimes allowing me to feel as if I've won during a conversation, which is not necessarily a good aspect. It can cause destruction of communication and sometimes even relationships. How I plan to deal with this? I plan to use the six alternatives to defense to calm the climate. Description, problem orientation, spontaneity, empathy, equality, and provisionalism. When integrating these into my verbal and nonverbal communications, I can break the defensive barrier. Next slide. Third barrier that I will talk about is reactive versus empathetic listening. A reactive learning style is when, for instance, a person is conversating with me and I'm not really into the conversation, I'm not necessarily listening, and I like to just say something that I know that they want to hear. When I'm distracted, I notice that I'm not truly listening to what is being said. So sometimes I can have a reactive listening style. So I plan to become a more empathetic listener. I want to take the time to truly understand what a person is saying and listen for emotions that are connected. I'll be able to enhance my communication skills by doing so. As opposed to interruption, I will let the speaker finish before adding my self-disclosure to the conversation or my closing remarks. Next slide. So, how to improve listening skills. In order to improve my listening skills, I will embark on the following. Acknowledge. I will acknowledge that it is okay for the talker to feel the way that he or she does, and this requires patience, which really I didn't obtain until my daughter was born. I will repeat information accurately so the talker knows that I'm literally hearing what he or she says. Alternating feelings and thoughts. By moving back and forth between the two, it creates a better balance by allowing them to see each other or the feelings that affect one another. I will allow space for individuals to open up our minds and expand what we originally thought about the conversation. When we allow space, this is not only beneficial to the speaker, but also to the person listening. Next slide. Internal and external noise pollution. Okay, so these things can be kind of detrimental to listening and conversation in general, communication. So internal things like if you're tired, if you haven't eaten, if you have low energy, you're only hearing what you want to hear from the speaker. Your emotions could be positive or negative. If you've had a bad day at work, your negativity may rub off onto the person in a conversation during communication. Some external noise pollution is like birds chirping outside or a pretty sunflower sitting outside the window, other conversations or chitter chatter going on in the background behind you in conversation, the room temperature, if you're too hot, if you're too cold, if you're uncomfortable, if you're sick, radios, clocks, and noises from outdoors. These are all distractions that could lead to poor communication. Next slide. So some of the possible solutions to noise pollution are to make sure your head is clear before you actually start a conversation. Sometimes people like to are better at conversations in the morning right after they wake up, or as opposed to in the evenings when they might be tired or had a long day at work, or their emotions could, from the work day could rub off onto the conversation. Make sure you're comfortable in your setting and let the talker know if there's anything distracting you from listening appropriately. Move away from other conversations and allow for better listening without distractions. You're going to repeat back to you can repeat back to the individual what is being said to make sure that they know that they have your full attention. Lastly, my plan of action. I would like to listen more attentively and respectively. I want to practice my self-disclosure techniques by not bringing up the past and focusing on when it is appropriate to disclose certain information. Being able to trust individuals. To know that I am allowed to have my own opinion. Also, others are allowed to have theirs as well, but the way that we express our opinion should be thought thoroughly through before responding. As a talker, to repeat information that is not clear to gain a better understanding of what is going on in the conversation. So if I don't know what is going on, I would like to ask questions and understand what is going on, maybe due to a distraction. I want to have an open mind and to work on my listening skills by practicing the techniques that were taught throughout the course. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this.